Your trademark is stupidity.
It's time for a quick exercise. Let's take a look at the George W. Bush stem cell research policy. Come on.
Warning, the following video contains metaphor. It may be too heavy for pro-lifers or Sarah Palin.
Here's an egg. Now we're going to put it through in vitro fertilization and implantation to make the human life. Mazel tov, it's a boy. But uh-oh, in the in vitro fertilization process, you use many embryos, but only one is implanted to become a baby. Let's see what the George Bush policy would have to do with these other embryos. But wait, isn't an embryo a human life? Let's see. Here we have a baby brought to term. And here's an embryo. There's just a little bit of a difference, don't you think? In 1999, a report by the American Association for the Advancement of Science and the Institute for Civil Society reported thousands of frozen embryos are mandatorily discarded and hundreds of thousands are simply abandoned. To have these perfectly good eggs around and just throw them away seems like a waste, doesn't it? The two sides of it basically establish themselves over the use of human embryos. One side, a human embryo should not be considered a human being and therefore have a relative worth of protection. Again, that's a pro-stem cell research side. The pro-life side is human embryos enjoy the same moral status as human beings and merit equal protection. And the pro-life side, humans are with fully cognizable legal rights are created at conception. Research is morally impermissible, no matter what the potential therapeutic upside may be. All embryos should be treated as judicial persons. The Supreme Court sometimes says otherwise. In Roe v. Wade, which covered abortion, not stem cell research, obviously, but it did not resolve when life actually begins, but it's clear that the fetus did not have rights until the first trimester. Planned Parenthood v. Casey established viability as a line before the fetus can be protected by the government. As you saw in the first video, a blastocyst, which is where a 5-day-old embryo, is how they derive the embryonic stem cells. That's not viable. That's a 5-day-old clump of cells. But still, not everybody agrees with Planned Parenthood versus Casey or Roe versus Wade.
I'm also known as Jane Roe, the plaintiff in the Supreme Court case, Roe versus Wade. Upon knowing God, I realized that my case, which legalized abortion on demand, was the biggest mistake of my life.
The anti-stem cell research line on the pro-life side advocate other sources, including do no harm. They advocate using adult stem cells and umbilical cord stem cells. These sources have been funded throughout the Bush administration. They have never been hampered by any of the policies put out. However, scientists still say that the gold standard is still embryonic stem cells, even though advances are being made in other areas. Now, on the pro-research side, one of the biggest concerns is waste. Many eggs are fertilized during in vitro fertilization, but the process only puts a few back in the female. The rest are adopted, donated for research, or destroyed. The American Association for the Advancement of Science reported in 1999 that thousands of frozen embryos are mandatorily discarded, and hundreds of thousands are simply abandoned or destroyed. There are lots of potential cures out there. Bone marrow transplants, which is adult stem cells, have been going on for 50 years to treat leukemia. Alzheimer's and Parkinson's experiments with Parkinson's patients had stem cells implanted in the brain and have shown benefit. Bone diseases such as osteogenesis imperfecta and that very long CH word can be treated by having stem cells replace the defective bone cartilage. Other ailments, the National Institute of Health believes stem cells have the potential to treat spinal cord injury, stroke, burns, heart disease, and arthritis. And then there's the actual example with the Savior signal. Just back in January 26th, Tala was born through in vitro fertilization in France. The embryo was screened to make sure it did not have any genetic defect for beta thalassemia that her siblings possessed. After being born, the umbilical cord stem cells were used to provide treatment for the already born siblings. But this happened in France. The United States did this about 10 years ago. Molly Nash was born with anemia, with a potentially fatal bone marrow disorder. Her parents used the same process to have an embryo screened, and her brother Adam was born. The umbilical cord stem cells were used to treat Molly. Within a month, Molly was functioning just fine, and today, Molly and Adam are 15 and 11. Back in 2000, the first Savior sibling was born, and this guy came along.
As a person of faith, I believe we are called to care for each other and work to ease human suffering. I believe we have been given the capacity and will to pursue this research. But after much discussion, debate, and reflection, the proper course has become clear. The majority of Americans from across the political spectrum and from all backgrounds and beliefs have come to a consensus that we should pursue this research, that the potential it offers is great, and with proper guidelines and strict oversight, the perils can be avoided. That is a conclusion with which I agree. And that is why I'm signing this executive order, and why I hope Congress will act on a bipartisan basis to provide further support for this research.
Well, when Barack Obama came in, he promised more stem cell research and freedoms, and he did just that. Executive Order 13505 from March 2009. It revoked the presidential statement of 2001 and Bush's executive order. It allowed the National Institute of Health to support and conduct reasonable, scientifically worthy human stem cell research, including embryonic stem cell. However, it did not outline the standards that are to be used. They charged the National Institute of Health to establish new guidelines. However, just since 2009, these advancements alone were made in 2010. Z-scan found in embryonic stem cells. It is subsequently found in induced pluripotent stem cells, which are non-embryonic stem cells that are, it makes non-embryonic stem cells able to be pluripotent just like embryonic stem cells. It allows stem cells that are not derived from human embryos to be used as if they were. So it would nullify, this discovery would nullify the debate on whether it is ethical or not. In other experiments, growing bones. Embryonic stem cells have repaired bones in rats by making a polymer scaffold of bone and filling it with embryonic cells. And also hair-like cells were discovered. Hairs in the inner ear necessary for hearing, balance have been produced. They do not regenerate naturally. All these advancements were made within the NIH-supported labs with federal funds. There's been a critical response. An article on FoxNews.com by Dr. Manny Alvarez questioned, would the lift on stem cell ban lead to more abortions? The article itself is glaring errors, and the facts were clearly not checked. It highlights one of the biggest enemies of stem cell research is just public misconception. By putting a guy that calls himself Dr. Manny Alvarez on their front page, Fox News is a place where people get a lot of their information and their news. Just because a guy calls himself a doctor and puts an article up on Fox News doesn't mean you can trust him. I mean, just because a guy runs around on a lab coat telling you things, you can't always trust him. Then there's Mary Scott Doe. Mary Scott Doe is a fictitious frozen embryo somewhere in the United States right now. She started up showing in cases back in 2007 with Doe versus Klein, which was an AAPC challenge to California's Prop 71s that created the state agencies for stem cell research. It was dismissed for lack of venue. Next was Doe versus Sibelius. The plaintiff claimed that guidelines put out by the NIH violated the embryo's constitutional rights of due process, equal protection, and freedom from involuntary servitude under the 5th, 14th, and 13th Amendments. And then Doe versus Obama. It was contended that the frozen embryos are a class that deserve protection. It was dismissed for lack of standing. All these cases were either dismissed for lack of venue or lack of standing. The most recent was Doe versus Obama, and it was decided on the 21st of January this year. Where does this go from here? There are no Supreme Court cases yet on the issue of embryonic standing or embryonic stem cell research. Doe versus Obama was just heard by the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, so it was decided on the 21st of January. That's most likely to be the case that will actually go. There's no legislation. Both acts of Congress were vetoed by Bush, and none have come up since. The only executive orders have been issued so far. However, the next president, depending on who that is, could simply reverse the policy just as Obama had done. Any questions? All right, good. I have 3 for you. If a stem cell can be found in can become any cell in the human body, it is called what? Right. Adult stem cells are being used in which treatment to treat leukemia? Bone marrow transplants. And finally, the world's first Savior sibling was born in the U.S. in the year 2000, and his name was? gal. Adam Nash.
Your trademark is stupidity.